Order, order. Dame Niall Griffith to move the motion.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Sir Gary, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Mr Speaker for according us this debate on the very important matter of the future of the steel industry in Wales, particularly as we were limited by time constraints during our debate on steel 4 weeks ago. The news that we have had over the past few months has been devastating, with Port Talbot set to bear the brunt of Tata's plans to shed 2,800 jobs across the UK. With so many jobs going in such a short time, the effects will reverberate right across South Wales, because we all know that the number of people affected will be far greater. All the families of the workers, the loss of work for the contractors and the suppliers connected to the plant, and massive loss of spending power in the community, with the knock-on effects that that will have on local businesses. I pay tribute to the trade unions who've been working hard to present alternative plans to preserve jobs, keep primary steel making in the UK and facilitate a just transition to the green primary steel of the future. And I would urge both Tata and the UK government to look again at those plans. We stand today at a real crossroads for the steel industry in Wales and indeed the UK. We have the opportunity to be at the forefront of the new green industrial revolution, or to allow ourselves to slide into a second-rate position, to be left behind as the only country in the G20 which does not have primary steel-making facilities. I will return to the bigger picture of steelmaking across Wales later, and I know that many other honourable friends will talk about it, but I would like to start by focusing specifically on the future of the Tata Tinplates plant at Trostre in my constituency in Llanelli. Wales has a proud industrial history, and Llanelli has thrived on the production of coal, iron, steel, copper, and of course tinplate. The tinplate industry was already established in Llanelli in the 18th century, and by the 19th century, 80% of the world's tinplate was produced in South Wales, with Llanelli the tinplate capital of the world. Today's Tata plant in Trostre at Llanelli makes a variety of different materials that go on to be used in a range of products, from the sort of tin can that you would buy baked beans in to the compounds used to make the aerosol cans on your bathroom shelf. Forgive me a minute if I sing the praises of the humble tin can. This is such a practical, versatile and green product. For a start, it's eminently recoverable and recyclable. Then, of course, food in sealed cans keeps for months and does not need to be in the freezer or even the fridge, a great advantage in terms of those who cannot afford to run a freezer or have no access to a freezer. Food in tin cans tends to be cheaper than foods in other forms of packaging, and furthermore, those in dire straits can even resort to eating tin products cold without the need to afford the energy costs to heat them. Little wonder then that in hard times, COVID and the cost of living crisis, sales of tin products have held up. And by the way, back in 1935, Wellenvoord Brewery in Llanelli was home to the first canned beer in the UK and one of the first canned beers in Europe. Trostre currently receives its steel from Port Talbot, just some 20 miles down the railway track. That makes good economic and good environmental sense. And most importantly, Trostre workers know that they can depend on the consistency and the quality of the steel that comes from Port Talbot. Tata tell us that when they close the blast furnaces at Port Talbot, in the short term, before the electric arc furnace is built, they will import steel to supply the Trostre plant. That will be imported steel which will be made in blast furnaces abroad. So there will not be any saving in carbon emissions, quite the opposite. Processes abroad may indeed be dirtier. And then, of course, there are the costs and emissions associated with transporting the steel to Trostre. So the challenge will be to source the appropriate quality of steel to satisfy Trostre's needs. And as Trostre makes a number of products and serves a number of different customers, that means steel of the right quality to satisfy all those requirements. And as you can imagine, workers at Trostre are very anxious to know that deals for supplies of quality steel have all been sorted out before anyone even thinks about switching off the blast furnace in Port Talbot. They know, and I know, that the works manager at Trostre and his colleagues are doing all they can to assess potential sources, but inevitably, instead of the security that we currently enjoy with our supply from Port Talbot, people are worried, and importing steel means that there are far more unknowns. We'll be more vulnerable to logistical difficulties or price fluctuations, and if there's a shortage of supply, then foreign producers may well prioritise their home customers. So I'd like to ask the Minister what talks she has had with bosses at Tata about where they will be sourcing the imported steel for Trostre, what guarantees they can give that the quality will satisfy all the requirements at Trostre, when they expect the first shipments to arrive, what risk assessments and contingency plans they have drawn up to cope with challenges such as price fluctuations, a tightening of the market, with countries wanting to prioritise their own needs. And if the Minister could tell us also how imported supplies will be affected by the carbon border adjustment mechanism. The government has promised £500 million to Tata to develop an electric arc furnace. So can the Minister tell us if there is any conditionality attached to that loan in respect of Trostre? In other words, is the availability of that loan to Tata not just contingent on them building an electric arc furnace, but also on them securing short-term supplies for Trostre and safeguarding jobs there? And indeed, Shotton. Indeed, I will.
For Linetti for bringing this forward. And the Honourable is right to refer to the job losses at Tata Steel as one that affects Wales, but it also affects the ability of all of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland to manufacture steel for our business that we have. So does the Honourable not agree that the ability to produce British steel, which is of the highest quality, as the Honourable has said, needs to have greater governmental support to ensure it is competitive against steel imports from other nations? And does the Honourable further agree that the steel sector can provide employment throughout this UK and should be able and should be encouraged to do so?
Well, indeed, and as the Honourable Member will know, there have been 5 asks from the steel industry for many, many years, encompassing the aspects that he mentions there. Now, what we've heard from Tata, they say that for safety reasons, it's not possible to keep the blast furnace going until their proposed large electric arc furnace is up and running. However, there have been other suggestions, such as, for example, starting with a smaller electric arc furnace, which could be built whilst maintaining the blast furnace. So what discussions has the Minister had with Tata about keeping at least one blast furnace going in Port Talbot until an electric arc furnace is up and running? And of course, it's not just Trostre that Port Talbot supplies.
She gives way. And we are all aware, of course, that the risk to the 2,800 jobs in Port Talbot and elsewhere, we need to be highly alert to the fact that the question is a just transition, and that the one blast furnace is a part of ensuring that there is a just transition for this community. We also know that other communities in Wales, including the farming community, which is facing 5,500 job losses if the Welsh Labour Government brings in the Sustainable Farming Scheme, as it does, at its present implementation, exactly the same question there with just transition. I'm sure she will agree with me in asking the Minister and asking other governments that to ensure just transition for communities across Wales, where we have experienced decades of suffering for our very communities because those transitions have not been carried out properly, is something that is key to ensure the industries of all our communities.
Stream Wales. Leah Griffiths.
Indeed, we do seek a just transition for the steel industry. And of course, it's not just Trostre that Port Talbot supplies. If, as their current plans indicate, the plan is to close the blast furnaces several years before the electric arc furnace is ready, then all the downstream customers will need supplies. Now, the government could argue that that's Tata's problem if it closes down the blast furnace in 2024, 2025, but does not have an electric arc furnace up and running until 2027. How it bridges that gap, how it sources supplies elsewhere, how it keeps its customers happy. But of course, if those supplies are not there, we could see downstream businesses going out of business with huge job losses. It would be catastrophic for us internally to lose Trostre. So because the government is putting £500 million in, and because of the worry of job losses, it is pertinent for the government to be seeking assurances from Tata about Trostre, which is why I've asked the Minister that question. Now, as far as the electric arc furnace goes, we accept that it has a role to play. Indeed, we have a very successful business, Selsa in Cardiff, producing steel from an electric arc furnace. However, there's work to be done to assess the suitability of the steel produced in an electric arc furnace to meet all the requirements of the products that are produced in Trostre. It's not just as simple as throwing in any old scrap into the electric arc furnace. Clearly, the quality of source material is important, and I understand that a certain amount of metallics are required, which are not necessarily easy to source. Currently, we export scrap steel, and it's easy to see the logic of recycling that steel here in electric arc furnaces, but we cannot assume that all that scrap steel will just turn up at the electric arc furnace in Port Talbot, and the one that I understand is planned for Scunthorpe. It has to be sourced. Indeed, I will.
I think she's making an absolutely excellent speech. Just picking up on this point about the need to sweeten the mix in an electric arc furnace with iron ore-based metallics. Otherwise, there's no way that you can make the high-value products like the automotive sector and indeed tin can. Is she aware of the fact that only 3% of the world's iron ore-based metallics are in pellet form that can be transported across the world and put into an electric arc furnace? And does she therefore agree that by far the best option would be to keep Blast Furnace 4 going so that we can continue to produce the ore-based metallics for the electric arc furnace, because with 3% of the global supply, there's no way that's going to be possible?
Thank you. Indeed, I agree absolutely. The Minister has previously referred to steel as being infinitely recyclable. And indeed, it's a marvellous material, so much easier to recover and recycle than many other materials. However, whilst the life cycle of a tin can may be a matter of months, steel that is used in car manufacturing or construction will be tied up in those products for many years to come. And I very much hope that we will see an increase in investment in infrastructure projects. We on this side of the House have plans to make the UK a clean energy superpower, and we have so much potential here in Wales with the prospect of building floating offshore wind farms in the Celtic Sea, using Port Talbot and Milford Haven to deliver and service these projects. Just a pity that either through incompetence or stubbornness, the government has wasted a year failing to get any takers for floating offshore wind because of the unrealistically low strike price offered. And increased renewables and increased use of electricity means upgrading the national grid structure. We need investment in our railways, housing, hospitals and so on. So has the Minister, or her department indeed, made any assessment of how much steel in the UK is likely to need in the coming decade? And how much of that steel will be used for short-term products that will reach the scrap market fairly quickly, and how much will be locked in infrastructure that we hope will last for decades? Now, returning to the broader picture, whilst recognising the contribution that the electric arc furnace can make, it's bitterly disappointing that the current government plans look likely to leave the UK as the only country in the G20 without primary steelmaking. Whilst countries across Europe have been working on greening the primary steelmaking process using technologies such as direct reduced iron and green hydrogen, and indeed Sweden will start production next year in 2025, the UK government has not supported any such venture. There's huge competition out there to woo investment in the green technologies of the future, whether it's the US Inflation Reduction Act or similar incentives in the EU. When you look at the 2.5 billion that Germany is investing to develop green primary steel, you understand why we in the Labour Party are saying that's the sort of sum that's needed, and why if we were in government, we would be looking to invest a total of some 3 billion in the industry, rather than this government's £500 million. And the reasons why we're now facing the end of primary steelmaking in the UK must include the failure by the government to respond adequately to the asks of the steel industry, which they've set out so clearly time and time again. Time and time again, we've pointed out how much cheaper energy costs are in countries like France and Germany, whilst here in the UK, there have been specific negotiated packages. Indeed, I give way.
I'm extremely grateful to her for giving way and congratulate her on securing this debate and for her leadership on this issue, indeed. And it seems to me where the only hope is to try and persuade Tata to delay some of the implementations of their plans until there will be a change of government, we all assume, by the end of the year. And as the Honourable Lady mentioned, there is an alternative proposal for investment in the steel industry by the Labour Party. So my question, therefore, I suppose, is does she agree with me there is a potential role here for the Welsh Government to negotiate with Tata, as it does sit on the transition board? It would have very close relations with Tata executives to put forward the Labour plan, which would be ready to be implemented this time next year.
Well, I think anybody that can have some influence over Tata would be very welcome if they would indeed make these suggestions. So, where we were a moment ago, we were talking about specific negotiated packages which this UK government has offered. But although there have been those packages, you can see why steel and high-energy industries, when they're making investment decisions, cannot just rely on limping from one package to another, but need long-term security with low energy prices, requiring substantial measures from the government, such as massive investment in renewables and reform of the energy market. For us in Llanelli, we look across at Imoyden in the Netherlands, where Tata has a similar tin plant works to ours in Llanelli, but where, in close proximity in Imoyden, Tata will be keeping a blast furnace open and developing a direct reduced iron facility. That's the reality we are facing, greater investment for the future going elsewhere. And the UK government needs to ask itself why. So I hope that in summing up today, the Minister will answer my specific questions about the challenges facing Tata's tinplate works at Trostre, as well as the broader issues facing the steel industry across Wales.
Christina Rees, and happy birthday.
Thank you, Sir Gary. 21 again. And it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, as always. I must congratulate my honourable friend, the wonderful member for Llanelli, for securing this vital and timely debate. As we contemplate the future of steel industry in Wales, we are not merely discussing the fate of an industrial sector, but the heartbeat of a nation's economy and identity. This is never more so than in the Swansea Bay area region generally, and Port Talbot specifically. The area, which includes my Neath constituency and its town, has long been synonymous with steel production, with its history intertwined with the rise and fall of coal and of the resilience of its workforce. Today we stand at a pivotal moment in this narrative, poised to script the next chapter in the saga of Welsh steel. The challenges facing the steel industry are undeniable. Global competition, fluctuating market demands, and environmental concerns loom large on the horizon. Yet, alongside these challenges lies the opportunity for transformation and renewal. But the industry cannot do this against the backdrop of uncertainty and a diminished workforce. The idea that 2,800 jobs will be lost from Tata steel operations across the UK, the majority of which will come from Port Talbot, is unthinkable. The rejection of well-thought-out union plans for a gradual transition to decarbonisation means the almost immediate closure of 2 blast furnaces. The single electric arc furnace replacement will obviously produce less CO2, but also fewer jobs. First and foremost, innovation must be at the forefront of our endeavours, from embracing advanced manufacturing techniques to investing in research and development. We must harness the power of technology to drive efficiency and sustainability. Innovation will always be the cornerstone of a vibrant steel industry in Wales. But electric arc furnaces do not produce virgin steel, and the difference must be considered. The UK has only 2 sites which use conventional blast furnaces, Scunthorpe and Port Talbot, which collectively produce 5.9 million tonnes of steel per year and make up 82% of UK steel production. Despite the UK importing most of its virgin steel, the notion that we become a country that produces none is beyond the pale. British Steel, owners of the Scunthorpe plant, are also planning to replace its virgin steel production by 2025. Should this happen, the UK will become the only G20 country that does not produce its own virgin steel. The consequences of such a situation need to be fully understood. Secondly, collaboration is essential for success. Alongside partnerships forged between industry, academia, and the community, the UK government needs to step up to the table. A 500 million grant is welcomed, but much more can be done on energy prices, R&D support, and fiscal leverage. In addition, neither the Welsh Government nor the unions were involved in discussions prior to the announcement of this investment deal. The multi-union plan called for an additional investment of £683 million, involving a two-stage transition that would protect a further 2,300 jobs for over a decade, and not involving a single compulsory redundancy. The plan accepted that one blast furnace would close, and also potentially the coking ovens, during a managed transitionary period that involved producing iron for use in the new electric arc to be installed by 2031. The second blast furnace would then close in 2032. It is also clear that sustainability must be a guiding principle. We are all aware the steel industry has a significant environmental footprint, and we cannot ignore our responsibility to future generations. By investing in clean technologies, reducing carbon emissions, and promoting circular economy practices, we can minimise our impact on the planet while maximising our long-term viability. Sustainability isn't just a moral imperative, it's also a business imperative, as consumers and investors increasingly demand ethical and eco-conscious products. However, whilst I appreciate the need for decarbonisation, we must remember that steel accounts for only 14% of industrial emissions in the UK, which in turn is around only 2% of total national emissions. Importing virgin steel simply transfers the emissions and decarbonisation responsibility, while such overseas manufacturing is also far more carbon intensive. Lastly, Sigari, we must never forget the human element at the heart of the steel industry. Our success is built on the dedication and skill of the men and women who toil day in and day out. As we navigate the challenges of the future, we must prioritise the well-being of our workforce today, ensuring fair wages, safe working conditions, and opportunities for growth and advancement. A thriving steel industry is not just about profits. It's about empowering communities and enriching lives. Employment in the steel industry is not what it used to be, but a quarter of all steel industry employees work in Wales. And as such, job losses are disproportionately felt in Welsh communities. The future of the steel industry in Wales is not, of course.
Her excellent contribution. Isn't it the reality that the reason why there's been such a backlash in terms of this announcement is that it appears as if the British government are giving £500 million to lose 3,000 jobs in Wales, and there's been a massive, major PR disaster for the UK government?
I completely agree with my honourable friend who makes a really important point. I thank you. So the future of the steel industry in Wales is not predetermined. It's ours to shape and define. By embracing innovation, fostering collaboration, championing sustainability, and prioritising our people, we can build a future where Welsh steel shines brightly on the global stage. But the story of steel should not feature uncertainty, job losses, and community adversity. Let us write the next chapter in the industry's history, one of resilience, renewal, and prosperity for generations to come. Thank you, Sir Gary.
Oh, thank you very much, Sir Gary, and happy birthday to the Honourable Member for Neath. And can I commend the Honourable Member for Llanelli for securing what is a really important debate, because like other Honourable Members, the importance of having this debate was highlighted on Saturday when in Port Talbot and in Newport steelworkers marched and we all marched in solidarity with the workers, the unions, who I praise for their work, and there was a lot of strong political support there on both of those marches, including my honourable friend from Newport West. And we should never underestimate just how difficult a time this is for these highly skilled workers and their families. And I'd like to point out to the Minister that the average age of a steel worker in Llanwern is now 34. So these are people who will have mortgages and families to support. And I know will be true of my honourable friend for Port Talbot, Aberavon. In my time as an MP, I've seen year after year just how workers in Llanwern have repeatedly had to adapt and innovate to keep the business alive, and I really pay tribute to them for that. These are really well-paid jobs, and as we often say, for every one job in the plant, there are estimated to be 3 more in the wider community. And I'm sorry that the government and the company have put them in this position, and we feel deeply for them, and we commend the unions for all that they're trying to do, because this is a bad deal for steel. We need the best deal for steel, not the cheapest deal for steel, which is what the government are doing. And no matter, as the Honourable Member for Carmarthen said, no matter how the government dress it up, they're giving 500 million to Tata to make up to 3,000 people redundant, 300 in Llanwern, and in doing so are effectively ending the history of making virgin steel, the only country in the G7, the G20 to do so, at a time when we're just going to need this deal to build our green infrastructure, and at a time of global insecurity, we will be reliant on imports. The Secretary of State for Wales claimed on Monday that closing the blast furnaces will make us less dependent on imports, when he knows that Tata will have to import steel shipped in diesel-fueled vehicles from vessels from India. As the Welsh Government's Economy Minister Vaughan Gethin has said, the government is alone in seeking to propel the steel industry off a cliff in this way. In the Netherlands, in Sweden, in Canada, we see governments working in partnership with their steel industry. And rather than contemplate the multi-union plan, the government are not contemplating the multi-union plan, which promises a fairer, just transition to a greener future for the sector. The government shut the Welsh Government and unions out of decision-making on this, and then the Secretary of State has claimed that those proposing credible alternatives to protect jobs and virgin steelmaking for the future are unconstructive. Plans his Conservative colleagues in the Senedd backed in a vote very recently. And then we have the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, who called plans to make up to 3,000 people redundant a good news story. We're now in the 3rd week of the formal consultation period, and ministers continue to signal it's a done deal. Will the minister confirm today that she'll not undermine this consultation and she's still willing to engage constructively with Tata and the trade union should opportunity for an alternative approach arise? Will she also set out whether she's had assurances from Tata that the consultation will be given as much time as it needs beyond the 45-day mandatory minimum if necessary for a path forward to be agreed? There's still little detail available about how the funding available to the transition boards was planned to be spent. Can she elaborate on this and confirm whether steelworkers, supply chains and communities which may be affected beyond Port Talbot, including my own constituency, will also be supported? We've had 12, we've often said this, but we've had 12 steel ministers and 14 years of inaction with this government, vacating its role as a champion for our steel industry and a green industrial future. It is this party that's filling the void of that ambition by committing to accelerate the £3 billion Green Steel Fund to invest over the next 5 years in the future of our sovereign steel industry. I just strongly urge the government to look again at this deal, and if they won't step up and look again, I think they should step aside and let us have a government who will.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Sir Gary. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd like to also congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Llanelli, for securing this debate and for making such a powerful case, both for the Trustra works in her constituency, but also for the entire Welsh and British steel industry. It's been said many times, but I think it merits repetition, that the Port Talbot Steelworks in my Aberavon constituency is the beating heart of our community and of our economy. For generation upon generation, the people of Aberavon have made the steel that has built our country. Quite simply, steel is who we are. But this debate is not just about what steel means to my constituents. It's about our entire national story. Because Britain as we know it today, simply would not exist were it not for our steel industry. Steel makes the cars that we drive to the houses that we live in, to the offices that we work in. It even makes the knives and forks that we eat our meals with and the humble tin can, as my honourable friend Natalie pointed out. But Sir Gary, our pride never slips into sentimentality or nostalgia, because steel is not a sunset industry, and the steelworks is emphatically not a museum. Steelworkers have experienced enormous technological change over the last 30 years, and every time they've risen to the challenge, they've adapted to it. So when a customer asks for a new grade or quality of steel, our steelworkers deliver it. Indeed, most of the grades of steel being made in the Port Talbot steelworks today didn't even exist 10 years ago. It is a hotbed of innovation. And every time I've been into that steelworks, and I've been many times, I can tell everyone that I am truly impressed and inspired by what I see. But when I go into the works, I also see a workforce that is deeply frustrated. They know they're making the best steel that money can buy. But for 14 years, they've been competing with one hand tied behind their back, facing energy costs that are almost twice as high as their competitors in France and Germany, with government contracts going to foreign steel makers, Royal Navy ships being made with foreign steel. So our steel workers have been forced to look on helplessly as other governments around the world bring forward policies, strategies, and billions of pounds of investment to support their steel industries, whilst our government has just sat on its hands. So we're not here to plead for special treatment or for charity. This is simply about our demand for a level playing field. Which brings me to the deal that's been struck between Tata Steel and the UK government, a deal which is based on £500 million of taxpayers' money being spent on making 2,800 people redundant, and that's not counting the huge impact on supply chains and contractors. So, Gary, as I've already said, nobody is burying their heads in the sand here. Everyone can see that our planet is burning. And we also know that customers around the world are looking for zero carbon or low carbon products. So even countries like India and China will ultimately be forced to phase out their blast furnaces. So the question is not whether the transition is coming, the question is how to make the transition work for jobs, for our planet and for our national security. And it is crystal clear that the plan that's been pushed by Tata Steel and the UK government fails on all three counts. First, on jobs. In the US, there's Joe Biden's £290 million Inflation Reduction Act, creating 170,000 green jobs. In Europe, national governments are investing billions of euro into decarbonising their single steel plants. Yet the UK is the only country throwing thousands of steel workers on the scrap heap. Second, the plan fails on decarbonisation because the Tata Tory plan is based on importing millions of tonnes of semi-finished products from India, where steel production is 30 to 40% more carbon intensive than it is in the UK. So this deal is based on exporting jobs from Wales to India and importing carbon from India to Wales. You could not make it up. And third, the deal fails on our national security, because electric arc furnaces alone are not capable of making all the grades and qualities of steel that are required to meet the current order book, let alone to embrace the opportunities of the future. The result, in this dangerous and turbulent world, the UK will be the only country in the G20 that is not able to make its own steel from scratch. It is madness, Sir Gary. And this brings me to Tata's choice. Either they carry on with both blast furnaces for the foreseeable future, losing customers, making big losses and eventually leading to closure. Nobody wants that. Or they go for the 3 million tonne electric arc furnace only model, which forces dependency on scrap steel and on imports whilst making 2,800 people redundant. Let's call this the cliff edge option. Or the final and best option, adopt the compelling multi-union plan, which would protect 2,300 jobs nationwide over a decade and would see no compulsory redundancies at Port Talbot. In this plan, blast furnace number 4 would continue to run until the end of its life cycle in 2032, while a combination of new technologies such as direct reduced iron would reduce the reliance on scrap and would enable Port Talbot to produce the iron ore-based metallics which are vital for the electric arc furnace to function and deliver the entire customer portfolio. Let's call that multi-union plan the bridge from where we are today to where we need to be. So I urge the leadership of Tata and the UK government to walk back from the cliff edge, choose the bridge to 21st century steelmaking, choose the bridge to a committed workforce that will strain every sinew to deliver for you, choose the bridge to long-term commercial competitiveness and profitability. And I also say this to Tata: remember that a general election is coming, after which I hope that we on these benches can deliver a new government that will replace the chaos and incompetence with stability, predictability and diligence. In place of the laissez-faire negligence of the last 14 years, you'll find Labour's £3 billion steel renewal fund, which is there to drive and support the transformation of our steel industry in a way that sustains jobs and bolsters our national security. So, Gary, once you extinguish a blast furnace, that's it. There's no turning back. So I urge Tata not to take any decisions now that can't be reversed following the general election. Tata and the government can either take the path of managed decline or they can get behind the multi-union plan. They can either take the cliff edge or they can choose the bridge. Let us hope they make the right choice. We need our steel, let's value it, and let's fight for it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Sir Gary, and it's a real pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to say a few words in this debate, and I acknowledge the contributions made by my expert colleagues in this area. And obviously I wish the Honourable Member for Neath happy birthday, and I thank the Honourable Member for Llanelli for bringing such an important debate to this place today. Last Saturday, as my honourable friend from Newport East has already highlighted, I had the honour of marching through Newport city centre in solidarity with steelworkers from Llanwern. The strength of feeling among steelworkers and their families and the wider community across Newport and South Wales cannot be understated. My hometown of Newport was built on steel. We all know someone who works there in Llanwern, whether it's the family, friends or neighbours of all of us. We are here in this place today, not just for the steelworkers of today, but for the steelworkers of tomorrow too. Because we all know far too well in South Wales, once these sorts of industries are closed down, it's very unlikely that the skilled, decently paid jobs they provide will ever return. I made a promise alongside my honourable friend from Newport East on that march last Saturday to stand up for the steelworkers in Parliament, to ensure that their fight for the future of the industry on the production lines is heard loud and clear here in Westminster. It's vital that we fight for them and all our communities. Wales' future depends on those of us here speaking out and protecting the steel foundations we have, whether they're at Llanwern or Port Talbot Steelworks or at suppliers like Island Steel and recyclers like Sims Metal in Newport West. Whether they are producers, suppliers or recyclers, our country relies on the steel industry, and this Conservative government with its 5 Prime Ministers in 14 years has let them all down. So, Gary, I don't have time to list all the ways in which this Tory government in Westminster has endangered the future of steel in Wales, but I will highlight just a couple. Take Island Steel in my constituency of Newport West, a smaller supplier that employs 100 people on site at Newport Docks who find themselves regularly hampered by the current quota system, locking them out of business. It's yet another example of this current UK government being unwilling to engage with industry or even make an effort to understand the impact of their indecision and lack of strategy. Another area I have little faith in the Tories in Westminster in is their current negotiations for a trade deal with India. In principle, we would all welcome a trade deal with India, but the one negotiated by the current government is years overdue and their record on previous trade deals is not encouraging. They have repeatedly and consistently sold British workers short and undermined vital environmental and workplace standards we value here in the United Kingdom. The Labour Party believes that these trade deals should not seek to undermine our core values such as workers' rights, environmental protections and fair trade. This long overdue deal, which we still don't have the final details of, must ensure access for UK manufacturing, or it will be yet another bad deal authored by the Tories that strikes another hammer blow to the future prospects of our domestic steel industry. We've had a catalogue of failures, bad decisions and short-sighted decisions from this Conservative government. They have degraded and endangered the UK steel industry. But, Sir Gary, I don't want to end on a negative note because, after all, this is a debate about the future of steel, not the past. So there is hope for steel because a UK Labour government, led by my right honourable friend from Holborn, the leader of the Labour Party, would start by earmarking up to £3 billion for investment in green steel alongside the industry. because we must retain our strong and viable steel industry, because our automotive, our defence, renewable and construction sectors depend on it here. The next Labour government will work with, not in opposition to, our steel trade unions. We will build a bridge, as already been said by my honourable friend from Aberavon, not a cliff edge, to a just environmental transition using a blend of technologies. We will not leave anyone behind, because we saw what Margaret Thatcher did to our miners in the 80s. That will not happen on our watch. Decarbonisation cannot and should not mean deindustrialisation, as we know that it increases costs and pushes the environmental burden onto developing countries. With a Labour government in Westminster working together with a Welsh Labour government in the Senedd, we will ensure that steel production will continue to play a key role in the growth and prosperity of Wales, for our economy and for our people. Thank you.
That's good,
Thank you, Chair, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I also want to congratulate my friend, the member for Llanelli, for securing this debate, which is so important for the people of South Wales and indeed for the economy of Britain as a whole. I'm going to limit my contribution to ask 2 short questions of the Minister based on the Welsh Affairs Committee hearings on Port Talbot last month. During those sessions, when I asked Tata, and I quote, if the funding were available, would you reconsider your decision? Tata's response was, if somebody were to give us money, fine. We can look at other options going forward. I also asked the trade unions representing the workforce, and I want to commend the trade union movement in Wales for the work they're doing in unity with the steelworkers. When I asked the trade unions what levels of investment are needed for the plans, where should that come from, and should the government have a stake in steel making? One of the unions, Unite, the steelworkers' main union, said, and I quote, the need to retain virgin steel production in the UK is too important to be left to the decisions of one multinational company, and that we think there is a role for the government to have a stake in the plant as well. So I'd like to ask the Minister, firstly, after Tata said they would be open to other options, has the government considered that and discussed finding additional funding to save thousands of jobs at Port Talbot? And in relation to the nature of funding, can I ask the Minister if the government has considered taking a public stake in the steelworks to ensure our virgin steel manufacturing capacity continues? Mr Chair, in conclusion, as my honourable friends on this side have already stated in... Yeah, quickly, before I finish.
Mentioning the ending there, but it just occurred to me, as I was also very pleased to join the Welsh Affairs Select Committee hearing, and during the second session, I asked the Secretary of State for Wales whether the UK government had put any strings at all attached onto the 500 million strings in terms of jobs guarantee. Are you clear that the electric arc furnace model is going to work without access to iron ore-based metallics? And he referred me to the Department for Business and Trade and said, well, they struck the deal, so they should be able to answer your question. So I wonder if my honourable friend may wish to add a question to her list of questions around whether there were any strings at all attached to the 500 million.
Indeed, I think that is an extremely important question. And another question my honourable friend raised, where we didn't get a response to, was the timing and the time frame within which that 500 million is going to be paid. So there are a series of questions, and if you haven't seen the transcript, I would urge the Minister to look at the transcript of, there were 4 sessions in total during the course of that day, and there would remain a number of unanswered questions from those sessions, some of which we have brought to light here today. So in conclusion, as I was saying, my honourable friends on this side have said in much more detail about the devastating impact that the closure of the steelworks in Port Talbot and for many other businesses in Wales is going to have on our communities. Wales was at the forefront of the Industrial Revolution. Our communities were built on coal, iron and steel. But our history is one where the wealth from our country has been extracted for the benefit of a few. And that continues, and this is a prime example of the lack of consideration given to the people and the communities of Wales. We can and will be at the forefront of change, and the multi-union deal, indeed all the deals that are being proposed by the trade unions, do offer a solution, and Wales can be at the forefront of a green industrial revolution, where not only is the wealth created in Wales, but that wealth is retained within our community, so we do no longer suffer from levels of unacceptable poverty and deprivation. We're a wealthy nation in terms of our natural resources, and we deserve a different future. And we will continue to stand in solidarity with our workers as well as our trade unions to say that we are not going to put up with this continued extraction and exploitation of our communities in Wales. I look forward to hearing the Minister's response to the specific questions. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much. We now turn to our front benches. Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Sir Gary. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I am delighted that my honourable friend from Llanelli was able to secure this debate, and I want to congratulate her on such an excellent speech. She's right, we stand at a crossroads and we risk being left behind. And she painted a lovely picture of the tinplate factory and how long, as she knows when my grandfather worked, how long that has been there, but also the other speeches, particularly the member for Aberystwyth, telling us that this isn't about the past, this debate is about the future and what the steel industry can become. And the members for Neath and Newport East and Newport West and others made really brilliant speeches that I think highlighted the problem incredibly well. I listened very carefully to the debate, and I'm very proud to have such members on this side of the House standing up for workers in South Wales. But my main takeaway, I think, from considering everything that's been said is, what is this government for? What is it usefully doing? What is its plan on steel? The challenges we face in Wales have been excellently set out, but let me set the broader context here. The steel industry is badly broken. It has been lurching from crisis to crisis for more than a decade. And there are two fundamental points where the system isn't working. First, the steel industry doesn't serve the needs of the UK, of our economy, for our security. Companies pursue completely legitimate corporate objectives, but those aren't aligned anymore with what we need as a country in terms of our security or our economy. And second, the steel industry isn't serving the needs of private investors either. Companies are struggling to make money or find opportunities for growth. We've seen investment in the steel industry in other equivalent countries, big investment, but it's been staggeringly low for many years in the UK. It's not working for anyone. So what has the government done in the face of this challenge? Well, the worst of all worlds. It doesn't know if it wants to be interventionist or not. It doesn't know whether it wants to encourage competition or not. It doesn't know whether it wants a plan or not. It dithers, ministers change, obsessions lie elsewhere. And so this government ends up treating each crisis in isolation, supporting existing players in the market, not encouraging new ones, failing to tackle the lack of competitiveness, pouring billions of pounds of public investment into the steel industry without any improvement in the sector, without any increase in capability, and actually a significant fall in the amount of steel we are making. And the overall outcome, our steel industry is now smaller than Belgium's, jobs have been offshored, and we've damaged our communities. Labour's approach could not be more different. We will not pour billions of pounds into an industry without being clear what it's for, what the outcome will be, how the UK's security and economy will be enhanced. We will not stifle competition. We welcome competition. We will go after new entrants into the market to encourage investment. We want the UK to be the most attractive country in Western Europe to invest in steel. Labour's £3 billion investment in steel will unlock billions of pounds of private sector investment. We won't just shore up a broken model like this government is. We will not dither. Our industrial strategy will clearly define the objectives for UK growth. We will identify the space where UK national objectives align with corporate objectives, and we will be agile enough to respond to the different scenarios facing the industry by the time this wretched government has finished its work. And Labour also has a commitment to primary steelmaking. Unlike this government, we will not jeopardise the security of our nation. And in Wales, I will give way.
This is a genuine question. I'm not trying to catch her out. You know? And as I was alluding earlier in the debate, there will be a change of government before the end of the year. The Honourable Lady effectively will be the Minister. Does the Labour front bench, is it in a position to actually negotiate directly now with these steel producers about the plan that will be in place in a year's time? Or, you know, you're essentially a government in waiting, aren't you? So does that happen, or is there no chance for that to happen at all?
Well, obviously we need to wait to see if there is a change of government, and we wouldn't assume that, but we are, many of us are talking to Tata, are talking to the unions, are in constant conversation about what the way forward is, and also talking to government about a different approach. So I think we're doing everything we can from an opposition point of view, but obviously the government holds the reins at the moment. Yes.
She makes mention of talking to Tata, and presumably that's something that's been ongoing for some time. Can she be very clear whether her understanding is that Tata would have removed all of their UK-based jobs had they not been able to reach a deal with the government for some support at Port Talbot?
That's not my understanding, no. And what we're trying to focus on with any conversations we have about any industry in terms of steel is what's the future, where do we go from here? And I think that is the important question. So my advice to the Minister is to go and talk to the Honourable Member for Ashfield. Talk to him about when he worked down the mines, and talk to him about what happened to his communities when the mines shut. The cliff edge, the redundancies, the closure of all the community assets that went with it. Because that is what we risk doing in Port Talbot with the cliff edge that we are facing. Nearly 3,000 jobs, and the huge knock-on impact, the one job in the plant also having 3 jobs in the community. So let us not lose 3,000 jobs in Port Talbot. Do not spend £500 million on that. Let that not be the government's legacy. And it is not too late. There is an alternative we could all work towards. The multi-union plan helps us transition in a way that protects jobs. That is what the government should be talking to Tata about. It is not too late for the government to have a steel strategy. It's not too late for the government to spend taxpayers' money in a way that works for the UK and for our economy and our security. It is not too late for the government to listen. Listen to its own work, if not Labour's. The government's own 2017 review, Future Capacities and Capabilities of the UK Steel Industry, identified the barriers to growth: supply chains, competitiveness, skills, research and development, capability. Has the Minister read that? What is the government's response to that review back in 2017? It could do with an update now, but the basics are there. The Harrington review is clear. The reality, he says, is that many of our competitors chase investments via their industrial strategies backed by substantial government support. The UK needs to respond. Has the Minister read the Harrington review, and what is the response on steel? What is the government's steel strategy? Ministers talk about how important scrap is going to be, and of course it is for electric arc furnaces, but how are they incentivising keeping our scrap here and it not being exported, which it currently is? Ministers talk about how we need new technology, but electric arc furnaces aren't really the new technology anymore. They're years old. What are we doing to take us towards a DRI facility in the UK using hydrogen? What is the plan? What is the plan to grow the steel industry? Where is the ambition? What is the government doing about CBAMs? The steel industry will be exposed to unfair competition. So what is the Minister going to do about that? What is the plan on skills? And what is the government's view of the multi-union plan for steel in Port Talbot? Many of the manufacturing industries I meet across different sectors are at a crossroads. Bills are high, there's no strategy to support them, they're reducing their output and struggling to find people to work with them. And the steel industry in Wales is a case in point. The government's last-minute chaotic deal was a masterclass in how not to run the transition. Members across this House are worried about the future of the UK steel industry. Members across this House do not want thousands of steel workers to lose their jobs, and members... I will give way.
Thank you for giving way. She's summarising the discussion extremely well. I declare an interest. I'm a member of the Transition Board. During the discussions of the Transition Board, we talked about what the vacancies look like in the labour market in South West and South East Wales. And the vast majority of vacancies are in the retail sector, healthcare sector. These are really important sectors and important parts of our industry, but does my honourable friend agree that there's not really a connection between the skills and experience of the men and women who've worked in the blast furnaces, for example, and the vacancies that are in the labour market outside those steelworks? And that's extremely worrying.
My honourable friend makes a really good point, and that's where we keep coming back to this cliff edge approach. That's not the way to transition. If you think about South Wales, you think about the Celtic Sea, you think about the huge opportunities with an industrial strategy and industry working together with government, the jobs that we could create, the growth we could create. But have we got any of that under this government? No, because they don't even have a starting point of a plan for steel. So members across this House don't want to see this country as the first developed country in the world without capacity to produce primary steel. Is the Minister concerned about our defence capabilities if we lose the capacity to make steel here from scratch? Does she think the government's plan is really money well spent? And can she answer the question that was originally put about what conditionality has been placed upon this deal? I think this is an answer that we keep asking for and we have yet to receive. Labour will have clarity of vision on steel. We will invest to unlock private sector investment, and we will work hand in glove with the private sector. We will use our flagship policies, the National Wealth Fund, GB Energy, becoming a clean energy superpower, grid reform, and industrial strategy to make the UK a place to invest in, not leave. So can I thank again my honourable friend from Llanelli for making such a brilliant speech and all the contributions that we have heard. And I hope this debate serves to raise the government's game, but Labour stands ready to step in if it does not. Thank you.
To respond, Mr. Ghani.
Thank you, Sir Gary. It's an absolute pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I would like to congratulate the honourable member for Llanelli for securing today's important debate and for speaking so powerfully on behalf of her constituents, many of whom, as she says, are directly affected by the proposed closure of the blast furnaces at Port Talbot. It was also lovely to have on the record the importance of the history of steel making, especially tin cannon, and for me to now observe canned beer as well, something new that I will try and take forward somehow. I know all honourable members have recognised just how vital it is that we have a competitive, thriving steel industry, not just for jobs at both the Port Talbot and Tostra plants, but also because of how important steel is to the broader Welsh economy and its future. I want to thank honourable members for their valuable contributions to this debate. It is unfortunate that the member for the opposition front bench had to make it so political, but I will try and address as many points as I can in my remarks now. But first, let me start by expressing my heartfelt sympathies to the hard-working employees across Wales and the rest of the United Kingdom affected by Tata Steel's announcement. Undoubtedly, these are challenging and turbulent times for everyone involved, not only for the workers, but also for their families and the communities in which they live. Steel has played a pivotal role in modern Welsh history, and its people take immense pride in their industry and their workforce. This government is working hard to secure a long-term, sustainable future for Welsh steelmaking and to grow the legacy of this cornerstone industry. The concerns expressed throughout this debate are indeed our concerns. They are shared by honourable members across this House, and they have been represented by government in our negotiations with Tata. We are indeed holding them to account. The Transition Board has already been mentioned. We are ensuring that this transition is managed properly so that every employee receives the support that they deserve. And that's why the government is making a significant investment of £80 million towards the dedicated Transition Board, to which Tata are also contributing £20 million. The board includes representatives from this House, the Welsh Government, the local council and other key voices to ensure the local community is well represented and supported through this period of change. In addition, Tata Steel has committed a further £130 million towards a comprehensive support package to assist impacted employees. So this government is indeed working hard to ensure that the help and support is there for those who need it and throughout this disruptive period. And so, Gary, I'm also present at those transition board meetings, as are the unions who I meet up with regularly and I believe I met up with them just this week. I forget, my week blurs into one. But there's our regular meetings taking place as well. So the point about ensuring that we are involved in constructive dialogue stands and is noted and on record. At the same time, we must not forget the context that led Tata to this decision, because the alternative, regardless of the politics being played out, could have led to no steelmaking at Port Talbot completely. Of course.
Would the Minister recognise that many of the investment decisions have been taken because over the past few years, the difference between energy prices here in the UK and in other countries across Europe, like obviously France and Germany, have had a very significant impact?
The Honourable Member always makes very thoughtful interventions, and it is right that energy prices have spiked, also because we know what's happening in Ukraine, and it is most definitely a challenge. But the support that we are providing, Tata, is the largest support or grant ever been made available to the steel industry. That was not done under the Labour government. It was done under this government, Sir Gary, providing the widest and deepest level of support to the steel sector. I will turn to my colleague. Yes, indeed.
I acknowledge that the issue with energy prices predates the events that happened in Ukraine 2 years ago.
So, Gary, the energy prices are a component. There also is a challenge that customers, end users, are also seeking cleaner steel. And there's also a challenge of managing blast furnaces that are coming to the end of their life. This is a complicated scenario, but the reality is, because of the support that we have provided and the Transition Board, which is focused on supporting the staff, that there will continue to be steel making in Port Talbot. And I'll now go to my colleague.
The Honourable Member for Greenway. Can I just be very clear in my understanding? In the negotiations that happened with Tata, and she talks about the £500 million support package, as part of those negotiations, did the government get a deal, an understanding, some certainty over when the blast furnaces would be switched off as part of that deal?
My honourable friend is far more knowledgeable on steel plants and steel making than I could ever be. The discussions continue. There is a consultation taking place. I was with the unions just this week. They will continue to push their plans, which Tata have made very clear are neither credible or economically viable. But within those plans, there is a proposal that electric arc furnaces will be upstream, not years away, but in just a couple of years' time. And that's what also gives assurances to the supply chains within that. But I know that my honourable friend knows that negotiations continue with British Steel. She'll probably want to intervene on me later on. But there was a huge amount of support provided by Tata and the Transition Board, which makes this a far easier programme of work to manage. So if I just return to Tata, they have seen a decade of financial losses, with the Port Talbot plant reportedly losing £1.5 million every day. And these, as I mentioned earlier, these challenges stem from complex international dynamics. China's long-standing practice of flooding the global steel market with subsidised products that have been a significant factor. And despite our efforts to mitigate the impact of cheap imports through domestic measures and challenges unfair practices internationally, we cannot ignore the harsh economic reality. Private companies within the UK steel industry are facing immense difficulties in turning a profit. In fact, without the opportunity to transition to a modern electric arc furnace, the very existence of Port Talbot plant would have been in jeopardy. So, Gary, I cannot stress that enough, indeed.
It's about China. Of course, we know that the cheaper steel from China has been kind of quite a factor, but major importers to the UK are Western European nations, the Netherlands, Italy, Spain, Germany. We're not competing with them either. There is a fundamental problem in the way that we run this economy that has meant that our industries can't be competitive when others in the European Union can be.
I think that the Honourable Lady is taking a very narrow view. Still, production within Europe is also coming under huge challenge, which is why they are also... I will do. Which is why they're also considering moving to far greener forms of producing steel. It's not just a UK problem. This is a much more of a larger problem than just the UK. Indeed.
Way, and on the issue of competitiveness, in Germany, we pay 50% more for our energy costs in this country than they do in Germany, and the German government is putting around 2.6 billion into helping the industry transition. That is a major effect, isn't it?
I will go on to answer some of those points. The support we provided with energy costs and the supercharger initiative that's coming down the line as well. We have provided support for energy costs for high energy industries, and I will reflect on that shortly. Now, the reality is that, as I mentioned earlier, Sir Gary, the Port Talbot plant would have been in jeopardy. The closure of the Port Talbot plant would have devastating consequences for the town and pose a serious threat to the UK as a whole, endangering the 8,000 jobs provided by Tata Steel across the country, as well as numerous small businesses in the steel-making supply chain.
Will she give way on that?
I will do in just a moment. As I mentioned earlier on, my relationship is on record of being regular and constructive, so it does disappoint me when members come to this place and won't accept the reality of what was taking place in Port Talbot. And if we had not provided support, which is the biggest support we provided to the steel sector, there would have been a devastating impact on the entire 8,000 jobs. There is a queue. I will do. My friend.
I raised this issue with the Shadow Minister about whether the whole of the the Tata Steel jobs in the UK would have been at risk if a deal wasn't done at Port Talbot, and presumably that's where the 5,000 jobs saved figure comes from. Would the Minister just be very, very clear? Her understanding is not the same as the Shadow Minister's understanding. Her understanding is, I think, that all of those 8,000 jobs would have gone.
Sir Gary, I thank my honourable friend for putting that on the record. I'm not sure what evidence the member opposite has to provide any assurance that the plant would not have been under threat. I think Tata themselves, when they have been circulating information prior to these debates or any announcements taking place, have said that there was an absolute threat to Port Talbot and Tata coming under threat. And that is the reality. So if there had not been the support that had been provided, there was a risk of losing all those 8,000 jobs. There is a queue. My friend.
I thank the Minister for giving way. Surely when the government enters into a negotiation with a highly experienced business such as Tata Steel, experienced in the business of negotiation, they consider the possibility that a gun is being held to the head. And they consider the possibility that Tata Steel is, of course, going to make threats about total closure because that strengthens their negotiating position. Was the government just completely naive, or was it incompetent in going into a poker game, dismissing the possibility that they might be getting bluffed?
Sir Gary, the honourable member knows better than most how long these conversations and negotiations have been taking place. They've been going on for years. There was an opportunity for the party opposite that the member represents to have made an investment in the blast furnaces when they were in government. They did not do so. And the honourable member also knows that the blast furnaces are coming to the end of their life, so a decision was going to be made at some point. And the decision could have been made that they would have exited completely. And that would have been a loss of 8,000 jobs and the certainty within that supply chain. And my honourable friend knows that, Sir Gary, because he and I have been at meetings with the unions and also at the transition board as well. But I know it is very difficult when there are potential job losses in one's constituency. But the reality is the model wasn't working. And also, just before I take the intervention opposite, the members opposite constantly want harder, greener, net zero policies. And that's what happens when you flow those through. Customers, end users want cleaner, greener steel that's made at electric arc furnaces. So this is the outcome of also demanding cleaner, greener steel too. So the reality is, without the support, there would have been a high risk of Port Talbot and Tata no longer producing steel in my honourable member's constituency. Indeed.
I thank the Minister. She's been very generous in giving way. Just to return to this point as to whether it was kind of it was this deal or the end of everything. If the government had paid attention to its own report in 2017 that said, here are the problems with the steel industry, the supply chain, skills, R&D, transition, if they had read their own work and responded with a steel strategy, we wouldn't have reached a point where Tata now hold all the levers, all the cards, and are able to say, rightly or wrongly, that it's all or nothing. and we wouldn't be in this situation in the first place. But there is a deal that is available that the unions are supporting, which is reasonable and has a transition in a calmer way that means we won't have those job losses. Does the Minister think there is merit in that union plan?
Thank you, Sir Gary. I will go on to reference that, but as the Honourable Member knows, the plan is not one that is subscribed by all unions. It is one that's put forward by a collective, not all of them. And TART has been very clear that keeping open a blast furnace whilst opening up electric arc furnaces in a very narrow period of time to provide us the certainty that we need to ensure that we can use scrap steel within the UK, it is neither credible nor is it financially viable. That's also issues around security and health and safety, also very, very difficult things about keeping a blast furnace open. Those negotiations continue. This is why there's a consultation taking place. And our question was asked of me earlier, what am I doing to make sure that TARTA is observing the parameters of that consultation? That is why the Transition Board is in place too. And our focus is on making sure that the consultation is as wide and as deep as it can be. And the Transition Board is able to do the job that it's been set up to do with the huge sums of money as well. If I just return to what I was saying earlier on, I've already mentioned, and I cannot reiterate enough, the threat that the Port Talbot plant was under. But we recognise the vital importance of the steel industry to the community's heritage and identity. And as I've mentioned earlier, the government has committed £500 million, the biggest sum ever invested in the steel sector. And that's a part of a £1.25 billion of total investment to ensure the future sustainability of Port Talbot Steel. That's what we've been able to do, Sir Gary. And that is something that we should be reflecting on. This investment is a huge step towards fortifying UK steel. Sustaining those blast furnaces would entail significant additional losses for the company, compounding their current issues. Moreover, as the Honourable Lady knows, the UK's blast furnaces, like those in Port Talbot, are approaching the end of their operational lifespan. Very briefly.
Thank you. She keeps saying that the blast furnaces, plural, are reaching the end of their lifespan. Blast furnace number 5, yes, is very close to the end of its lifespan. Everybody agrees that that part of the heavy end with the coke ovens should shut down because the investment doesn't wash its face. Blast furnace number 4, its lifespan is till 2032. It doesn't require that additional investment. So I'd be really grateful if she would stop saying that both blast furnaces are reaching the end of their lifespan.
Thank you, Sir Gary. But as the Honourable Member knows, he's been at the same meetings that I have, that to be able to transition in a period of time to have the electric arc furnaces up and running, they cannot have the blast furnaces going and the electric arc furnaces being implemented. However, I know these conversations are taking place with the unions because I spoke to them this week and they are continuing to put their case forward. This is why there was a consultation period taking place. And the Honourable Member also knows these are the conversations that we just need to give them time to follow through as well. He wants to come back.
Just on that point of information, the multi-union plan is based on a 1.5 million tonne electric arc furnace. Nobody is denying that electric arc furnaces should not be in this mix. We are fully supporting an EAF. We need a 1.5 million tonne EAF running alongside blast furnace number 4, not least because then blast furnace number 4 can produce the iron ore-based metallics that are a vital part of sweetening the mix for the electric arc furnace so that we can continue to deliver the current customer portfolio and be ready to embrace the opportunities of the future. So I just urge the Minister to recognise that we want an electric arc furnace. It's just a 3 million tonne electric arc furnace is madness.
Minister.
Well, Sir Gary, 3 million electric arc furnaces do exist in other parts of the world. It's not a unique capacity arc furnace, but I know, because I spoke to the unions on Monday, they're continuing to put their plans forward. Let's see what happens in the next few weeks. But the transition, I think everyone recognises that a transition most definitely has to take place. And we've talked about not only supply chain resilience, but also, because of technology just moving forward, how we can use scrap steel within electric arc furnaces. And TARTA have confirmed that they will observe 90% of their supply chain, indeed.
Carried out by her department on what quality of scrap we have in the UK, because I keep hearing tonnages of scrap, but I don't think anyone knows exactly what that scrap is made up of, or maybe they do, and they don't know whether it's suitable to go in electric arc furnaces.
The Honourable Lady raises a very important point, but she knows that UK Steel, a number of other umbrella organisations have done a huge amount of work in this space, including with universities in Wales, and they have huge confidence that of the 11 million scrap steel that circulates our economy and of the 8.2 that's exported overseas, that we could retain most of that in the UK to use within the electric arc furnaces. And technology will move forward as well. It never stands still either. But Tata is confident that they can meet 90% of the contracts they have in place at the moment.
Will she give way on that
point? Very briefly, because I am worried I'm going to run out of time.
Can I just make an observation? It's helpful for the Minister to be able to respond to one intervention before people bounce up and down for the next one. So let's take it calmly.
Gosh,
Sarah Jones.
Thank you very much. It's been a while since I bounced up and down, Minister. Chair, I'm too old for that. But anyway, I just wanted to ask the question on scrap steel, whether the Minister is exploring incentives to keep scrap in this country, because at the moment we export it all. So is she looking at, VAT relief or tariffs or restrictions to actually help this process?
Sir Gary, I will make some progress before I take any further interventions. If my honourable friend paid more attention to the business model, the fact that we can't use more scrap steel within the UK economy, we just don't have the capacity to do it, but with the electric arc furnaces we will, and that will be the dynamic change that is most definitely needed. Furthermore, by reducing our reliance on raw materials like iron ore and coking coal, electric arc furnace technology offers a more sustainable alternative. Unlike blast furnaces, electric arc furnaces utilise scrap materials readily available. So as I said, we have about 11 million tonnes circulating. And readily available, abundant domestic sources within the UK. In fact, the UK ranks among the top exporters of steel scrap globally, second only to the United States, leveraging our ample supply of steel scrap for electric arc furnace production enables us to create new steel products locally supporting British and international manufacturers alike. Every tonne of steel scrap sourced domestically diminishes our dependence on raw material imports from overseas, none of which are our near neighbours. Now, wider support for the steel industry was raised. More widely, we are backing UK-made steel, and crucially, we are backing it in the right way, investing hundreds of millions of pounds to help the industry thrive in increasingly challenging global markets. We're launching initiatives such as the British Industry Supercharger, which reduces electricity costs for the steel industry and other energy-intensive sectors, bringing them closer in line with the charges of other major economies. That's complemented by the £730 million in energy costs relief we have given to the steel sector since 2013. That was £730 million in energy costs. And with specific support through our Energy Bill Relief Scheme and Energy Bills Discount Scheme. So we are ensuring the resilience and prosperity of the UK steel industry in the face of increasingly competitive global markets. And this work is preparing UK steelmaking for the coming years, but it's not the final word in future-proofing the industry. The Sustained Future Manufacturing Research Hub, which is led by Swansea University, the largest fundamental research activity centre working right now to decarbonise and improve the efficiency of steelmaking in the UK. And they're also, I believe, working in looking at the quality of scrap steel and looking at new technologies to ensure that we can make even more products using steel in the UK. Sir Gary, other points were raised by the member who sits on the Welsh Select Committee. I will indeed go through the transcript of that Select Committee. I was across most of the issues raised. She raised a point that if there was an unlimited budget, I'm not sure having an unlimited budget is a good use of taxpayers' money, nor do I think it answers the question of the demands of customers who are looking for cleaner, green steel as well. The question was raised about further technologies being able to be absorbed. We're looking at electric arc furnaces at the moment. But of course, this project is just the first step. As other technologies become commercial, they could be considered in the future. I thought a question about us taking a stake in the company was a curious one, because we have, this is a curious question to ask, because it's not something that we are, it's not something that we do, taking stakes in companies. And she talked about the condition on the grant. This is a consultation taking place. Agreements are still being finalised, and we will include appropriate conditions for the grant, which is why the Transition Board is also vital to that conversation as well. And the grant will be paid in arrears against set milestones for the build of the electric arc furnace as well. The Honourable, indeed.
all of those specific questions. I mean, they probably came from this side. But you've made a comment earlier on about the consultation process, and I'm slightly confused because you met the unions on Monday and you said you want to wait and see what happens in the next few weeks. So is this a done deal, or has the consultation process actually got some teeth in terms of potential outcomes? The multi-union deal is what the unions are pushing, and you met them this week, and you've just intimated that let's see what happens in the next few weeks. So are they still, which is what a consultation process, in my understanding, is about, are you still open to alternative options? Because Tata may not be, but UK government could be, just as the Labour Party has proposed, if and when we get into government.
It's another long intervention. Just a reminder that any reference to you is a reference to me. I'm certainly open to further negotiations, but that doesn't really matter. Is the Minister?
Thank you, Sir Gary. This is a decision for Tata to take. They have made it clear that the offer that the unions are putting forward aren't really credible, because they don't think that they are ones that enable them to transition, or transition in a way that doesn't provide a huge amount of losses, so it's not financially credible. However, the consultation is taking place. It's not that I've just met the unions this week. I meet up with them regularly, and obviously I attend the transition board as well. The consultation is to ensure that Tata is able to make the right decision, and one would hope that they do that in consultation and support of the unions overall, accepting that this is incredibly challenging when we're talking about any level of job losses. I just want to... I will, indeed.
This is a decision for Tata to make, and I absolutely understand that. But as we are putting in, UK government are putting in £500 million of funding, investment support, do we not have some say in that decision as well?
What we cannot do is force Tata, before we made the support package in place, force them to, when they say they were struggling, they were making losses of over £1 million a day, is to insist that they continue. We have provided an offer of support. We want to make sure that the least amount of people are impacted. We want to make sure the Transition Board provides support for the people that are impacted. And we want to make sure that supply chains continue to be resilient, and any decision that they take to transition is one that they meet within the framework that they put forward. For example, if they plan to continue with their 3 million tonne capacity electric arc furnace by potentially 2027, we need to make sure all those milestones are therefore met. I just want to touch the issue of procurement, Sir Gary, because I just think this is one that we have to really address. First of all, less than 1% of UK steel is needed by the defence industry, and it has nothing to do with Port Talbot. And under this government, we have implemented the procurement pipeline. It's something that I was committed to do when I became the Steel Minister, to encourage our steel producers to access more contracts. And in the last year reporting, there was an increase in the value of UK steel sourced from 97 million to 365 million pounds. I think it's important to put that on the record, because when ministers say that they will try and increase UK procurement, that we have most definitely done so. So, Sir Gary, I'm worried that we're going to run out of time. But the reality is, without our support, there would have been a very serious conversation fundamentally about the loss of 8,000 jobs at Port Talbot. And I appreciate that the party opposite cannot understand the realities of business, but I believe that under Labour, employment in the UK steel industry was cut by over a half, fall of 40,000 jobs when they were in power. So obviously they do not appreciate the numbers of jobs that we hope that we have saved. We announced that Tata's announcement will come as a heavy blow to the people of Port Talbot, but I really want to recognise that everyone in this room accepts that we cannot stop the clocks. Technology has moved on. There has to be a transition, and this is a transition where the majority of jobs will be supported with a substantial sum of money, and of course a transition board as well. And the transition that we're talking about today is one that enables us to adopt new technology, with even further technologies allowed to be adopted further on down the line. And it prevents a further loss of profit, and also prevents the dependence on imports going forward, because we can use scrap steel within our own economy. And I want to assure the Honourable Lady that we are committed to working with members across this House to realise a brighter future for our steel-making industry. The options that the members opposite propose, whether it's the 28 billion or the 3 billion, if they were seen as serious and credible, I'm sure Tata would have heeded those support packages, but obviously they did not think that they were either credible or able them to continue doing what they wanted to do, which is to transition to electric arc furnaces, and would have prevented, what could have enabled even further job losses taking place within Wales and across the UK. My last intervention, indeed.
She's been very generous. She said that the Tata plan would enable us to be open to new technologies. In fact, the opposite is the case, because the 3 million tonne electric arc furnace it negates the possibility of direct reduced iron capability, negates the possibility of an open slag blast furnace, negates the possibility of a plate mill. So it's closing down routes to other technologies. It is not opening them up.
Yeah. I've lost 2 minutes, thank you, Sir Gary. The reality about a DRI plant at Talbot is one. We're looking at other examples across the rest of the world. A DRI plant requires even fewer people. And I was looking at a plant in Texas where they ended up having a 2 million tonne DRI plant that only requires 190 jobs. And you can transition, and there will, an opportunity to transition is there. Often there's talk about hydrogen, Sir Gary. That technology has not been tested to the capacity it's needed for this particular plant and the levels of steel making that we need in the UK. So you can either just deal with this in real terms. These were conversations that have been going on for years. And I know, having spoken for the member for Port Talbot, we could have continued these conversations and had a cliff edge with Tata leaving, or we could have come up with the biggest settlement for steel and a consultation to make sure that the least amount of jobs are impacted. That is providing certainty and security for steel making at Port Talbot for years to come. And I fear I've run out of time. Thank you, Sir Gary.
Thank you very much. Dame Neil Griffith will have the final word.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir Gary. Well, I'd like to thank all my colleagues on this side of the House for a very comprehensive picture of the steel industry right across South Wales. And I think, we are all very, very concerned, from Llanwern through to Port Talbot, through to Trostre in Llanelli, and all our communities across South Wales. And I would like to thank the Minister for her responses, but I do hope that she will take away and reflect on the points that we have made, take away and reflect on the questions that we have asked, and look again at what more can be done in order to make us a steel-making champion of the world. Thank you.
Yeah, here. Well done.
This House has considered the future of the steel industry in Wales. May that being say aye. Thank you. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order. We can now move on to our next debate, because everyone who is participating is here, and the House is very keen to hear about the Junction 10A on the A14. So colleagues leaving, please do so quickly and quietly. Thank you so much. Not at all. Nice to see you. And it's my pleasure to call Mr. Philip